Hey guys, it's Christ, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to add social authentication to our backend REST API that we built using the Django REST framework. So previously we have built out endpoints for our income expenses application. So we have the authentication, the expenses CRUD, the statistics endpoints, and also the income endpoint. So now I want us to add social authentication such that users can log in via their Facebook, Google, or their Twitter accounts. Okay, so initially I had thought I would make tutorials show you how to build this line by line, but I figured it would be a lot, and there are a lot of concepts that go into implementing social authentication, especially on the back end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be showing you guys everything you need to know and where to get everything you want to get in order to be able to implement this. Then of course I'll show you the code that I'm using to implement it, and I'll leave the link to the code for this in the description so that you guys can take a look and see if you can use it for your future project. Okay, yeah, so here I have a login with Twitter button. So just to mention fast forward, I have built out simple clients. So this is a simple website that I'm using to test our backend service. So what will happen is when you have a website that's going to connect to our API, there will be a login with Twitter button like this. So what will happen is the user will click on it, and when they click the button, they are going to be taken to Twitter and then prompted to sign in. So at this point, they can go ahead and sign into their Twitter account. So we get this title saying authorize this application. So, and I'll show you how to set up this application in Twitter apps to access your account. Then they give them the information that we're going to collect, or that we can be able to collect. Then we can click authorize. Okay, so once everything is successful, we are brought back to our application and we are given this information here. So I'm going to come here and then open up I'm going to come here and open up the developer console. So in here, you will be able to see that we have some information sent back from Twitter, and that is the OAuth token and then the OAuth token separate. So what will happen is after you successfully log in a user on the website or on the mobile app, you will need to send these things to our backend API. So I'm going to come here and then go to Twitter. Then I'm going to click on try it out, but you can make this request using any client. So I'm going to have this OAuth token here. So I need to have one string, and then we also need to send the OAuth token secret. So we can come back here and then replace this and then send this. Okay, so if I click execute, you will see that it's going to go ahead and load, and what will happen is it's going to go ahead and send this one to our API. So what our API is going to do is it's going to talk to the Twitter APIs and get the user who authenticated using these tokens on the client. So we'll be able to get the emails, we'll be able to get the user, the names. So what we'll do is we'll get the names we get from Twitter, and then we'll construct a username that will be unique to our application, such that all the social users also get the information that our regular users have. Okay, so you see we give them the refresh token, and also we give them the access token. So now they can use this information to access any part of our application. Okay, just like we would with email password. Okay, that's well and good. So if we come here in our Django admin, you will notice that in my users, I only have one super user who's logged in. But when I reload this, you will see that we have another user who is me, and then we have my email there, and then we see that my auth provider is Twitter. So let's see how the Facebook will work. So I'm gonna come here and stop my front-end server. So I'm gonna go to my Facebook example, and then I'm gonna run this. And I'm gonna be leaving all the code that does this in the description so that you guys can check it out if you want to implement something of your own. So when I open it up, it's going to still open on port 550. So if I reload, you see that now we have a Facebook login button. So we want to make sure that we are making these requests from localhost. So make sure it is localhost, then port 5500. But this can be any localhost URL, but this can be any localhost domain. Otherwise, Facebook will need you to make the request over HTTPS if it's not localhost. Okay, so when I come over here, I can click login, and what that will do is it's going to go to Facebook and it's going to authenticate me, and you see that now it gets my username. So if I check my console here a bit, so if I'm gonna go to inspect and then go to console, so right here you'll find that we have this access token that we get from Facebook. So this is what we want to send to our server. So we can come back here to our API, click on Facebook, and then we can come over here and send this token to our web API. So I'm going to send it. So what will happen is it's going to go ahead and create my account. So you see here I'm using another email, and then go ahead and give me the tokens to access the application. You will notice that on Facebook, my name is Christ Truly as that. And then on Twitter, my name is also Christ Truly, if you guys noticed. So what happens is here, I'm going to reload this. So what happens is on our application, since our usernames are unique, for us, we have a strategy to construct a unique username for this user so that they can log in like this. Okay, so data side. So you see we have this user logged in. So you have this, you see we have this user logged in, and you see that they come in from Facebook. So another thing we are going to be looking at is how to handle a user with the same email from multiple providers. So on Google, I use the same email that I used on Twitter. So if I come here, so I'm going to stop this server here. So I'm going to stop server. Okay, then I'm going to go in my Google example and then run it. So I'm going to open it up like that. So it's going to come up. We want to make sure we are on localhost like this. And then when I click sign in with Twitter, sign in with Google, you will see that it opens the button, the tab, and then it signs me in. So here you can see we have signed in. So now if I open my inspector and then go to the console, you see we have this token here. So I'll be showing you how to extract all this stuff. So if we get this and go back to our API and we go to Google and then send this token to our server. So I'm going to come in and do send. Okay, we want to make sure it's a valid string. So let's have those and then put it there and then send. Look what happens. We see that we need to continue our login using Twitter because this email is already in the user in this token has an email that's already being used by the Twitter provider. So that's how we are going to be handling it. But of course, you can handle it differently depending on your requirements. So just wanted to put that one out there. So if we come here in our backend, in our admin, and delete this user, this Twitter user. So I'm going to go ahead and actually change the email a bit, and we keep the user. So you see here we change them. But so if I come back and make the request, so I'm going to click on Google and then execute it. Look what happens. We get the account created. We get the tokens sent back to us. Okay, so other than that, I'm going to show you how to protect who makes a call to our server using this token. So for example, if I came in here, so Google has an OAuth playground. So if I went to OAuth playground, so if we come here, we can actually generate tokens, but they won't be tied to our application, our client application. So our server won't know about them. So I can come over here and then choose the scopes that I want to access on Google APIs. Then I click authorize. So when I click authorize, they are going to prompt me to log in, say that they give me my tokens. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, so once that's done, you will see that now this is another application that's requesting this user to log in. So I'm going to accept this application for me to log in. But as you know, this is just a playground. So now we will assume that the user has logged into some application, some random application on the internet, and they have gotten this ID token. So if they got this ID token like this, and then they sent it to our application. So if you come over here and now send this, so I'm gonna come over here, repress this one. Okay, looking good. And then I'm going to execute it. So see what happens. So on our server, we are going to be able to tell that this token was generated by the client we know of. So for example, here you see that here when I run the Google example in my client, I have to send through this token here, so which the OAuth playground site didn't have. So that's why on our server, we can control who accesses the endpoints by knowing which clients that have access to it. So with all that said, I'm going to show you how we start working with Google. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you want to go to developers.google.com. Then you log into your preferred account. So when you log in, you're going to be brought to this section, to this dashboard where you can create applications. So what you want to do is you click on anywhere you would see create project, and then you will need to name your project. So I can call this project like EX app, something like that. and then you're going to need to create it. So once you have it here, what you want to do is you want to click create credentials. So when you click create credentials, what we are looking for is the OAuth client ID. So first you want to click create credentials, and then you select OAuth client ID. So what that will do is it's going to go ahead and open up this section, but they are going to want you to first configure a consent screen. So clicking on configuring the consent screen, basically what's here will be, we need to tell Google about our application. So we can say that any user can access it, and then we click create, and then here we want to give this information. So you will see that we need to put an application name. So you can put any application name here, and then that's all you need. If you have the privacy policy, you can add it, you can add them there, and then you want to click save. So once you have that, then you want to go to credentials again, and then you click create credentials, and then click OAuth client ID, and then you can choose your application type. In our case, it's a web application. Then you can give it a name, and then here you want to be very careful. So you want to select where you will be making the requests to the Google APIs from. So currently, for now, we are on localhost, but when you're running from, let's say, your domain, your hosted server, you can put that website URL here. So similarly, you also need to add authorized redirect URLs. So these will be the URLs that Google will redirect to after successfully authenticating in a user, or when a user fails the authentication. So you also want to have it here. So whatever you put doesn't matter. Make sure it corresponds with here, or you will get an error. Okay, so once you're done with this, now you need to copy this. So this is the client ID. You see, I've copied it here. So going back to the Django app, the first change I made to our authentication model. So the first thing I did was to add the auth provider property to our model class. So this will add auth provider to our user relation. So you will see that I have a dictionary of auth providers that we accept. And then you see that by default, I set the auth provider to be email. Okay, so once we have this, you will notice that I have set up a new app. So you can set up the new app using Python manage.py start app and then the app name. And then in the new app, let's start from the views. So specifically, I'm going to be focused on Google right now, and then I'm going to go to Facebook and also to Twitter. Okay, so for Google, you will see that we have a very simple view. So basically, just like an API view, you see we inherit from generic API view, and then we handle the post request, we handle what the user sends, and then we send it to our Serializer class. So the Serializer class is allowed to throw errors by this line, so that we raise any exception in the Serializer, it's going to be caught and sent back to the user. So if we go to our Serializers and then go to the Google Serializer, which is here, so you'll notice that the first thing we do is set up this property on the Serializer as a field. So this enables us to be able to access this one in the documentation, and also to expose this to the view. So other than that, you see we have this method called validate auth token. So what it does is it takes in the auth token that we send from the clients, and then you will see that it calls the google.google.validate. So I have a helper here called Google. So that's where I have the validate auth token method. So what it does is we are using this package here. So let me come over here and then bring it up. So we are using this package here. So this is the Google API Python client. So this gives you all the utilities you need to talk to Google APIs using Python programs. So this is what we are using. You need to install it using pip install Google API Python client, or if you're using ppnv or something else, you install it from the way you install using that package manager. Okay, so once we have that, now we can be able to import these things. So we see that we import something called ID token. So this ID token is the one where we call verify auth token method, and then we give it the auth token that we want to verify. So also at the same point, you see that we pass in request.request. So this makes sure that we can be able to make the check. So when we do that, you see that we are using a try catch, such that if we throw an error in here, for which in this case can be an error where we try to access like ISS and we don't have it. So here we are checking if the issuer of this token is a Google server. So once that is correct, then we will verify that we can return that information. Otherwise, if we throw an error, let's say we didn't get the issuer, this is going to run, and then we throw an error. So going back to our serializer, when the other validator returns the user info, then we can be able to get the sub. So in the Twitter language, you can think of the sub as the ID. So if we have the ID, that means that we got the user information correctly. But if we don't have it, then we throw an error also here. So when we throw an error, this raise exceptions in our view, we'll catch it and we'll send it back to the user. So going back right here, you see this check here. We are checking if the audience for this user information is our application. So here you see that in my environment, I have this Google client ID. So the way that works is here in my .env, I have this Google client ID. So that is the one that we get from here. So when you get it, you can put it. So when you get it, you can put it in your .env file, and then you can read it to check if people making requests are making them under that client ID. When we say client ID, so we mean a program or a series of programs that authenticated the user on the Google API. So currently, what we are doing is, you notice that in my demo here, I am using this client here and I am supplying a token here. And then, which means that when I run this application, this information is going to be sent to Google. And when they send me the token, this is always going to be in there. And we can check it on a server by checking the audience. Okay, so when we check that the audience is not the one that we had in our client apps, then we can raise an authentication failed, but you can have a better message, guys. Other than that, you will see that we create the user information. So we create the user ID, we create the email, and then the name, and then we set the provider to Google, and then we return a function called register social user. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So if you come here in register social user, you see that we get the user information that we are sending in from the serializer. So which is this, so the provider and blah, blah, blah. So when we come over here, where is it, register, you see that the first thing we do is we try to see if this user already has an email. So when we do the filter, we can have an exists method. So when you call exists, then when exists returns true, that means that the user already has an account on our application. So the next check we do is if the user has an account on our application, we are checking if the provider they had signed up with before is the same provider that they are trying to use to log in with. So if that's the case, then we are going to call authenticate, which will log in them. So which will log in the user, and then you will see that we pass the email, and then the trick that we do here is we pass the password. So this password is a simple password that I save in a .env file. So you want to make sure that you have some random secrets that you use for your social authentication users. So we call authenticate, and if we successfully log in, then we return the user information. So you also see that we call tokens on the user model. So if we come over here, you will see that everything we are calling here is defined in the user model. You guys, if you've been following along, you know that. So when we call tokens, so what tokens does is it's going to go ahead. So what tokens does is it's going to go ahead and create the tokens for the user and then return the access and the refresh token. Okay, so moving on, if we come back here in the register, if the user is trying to sign in with a provider that they didn't use before, but he uses the same emails on different platforms, we tell them to log in with their provider. So that's why you see this. This is catching this is the if for this is the else for this if. Okay, so if the user doesn't have an account, we go ahead and create their account. So you see we create this user object and then we call create user. Another thing here is we create the password for them. So this is a random password that we use. It can be anything as long as it's acceptable by Django. And then you will see that all the users that come from social providers, we verify them by default, so that we don't bother them to verify their email because we trust Google or what is it called, Facebook. Okay, so then you see we set their provider and then we save. So after we save, you see we log them in by calling authenticate and then sending them the exact same information. So right now, I know you might be curious about how this password is working and what happens when, let's say, someone sneaks on it. So what happens is on the authentication, serializers then login validate. So if I can come here on login validate, So you will see that on our email password login, we have added a check. So if the user with this email has an account on our app, so if we detect that the user has an account, we check if the user's account is under the provider for email. So if it's not, we don't go ahead and log them in, even if they had, you see that if they try to use this and they didn't use that provider, we tell them to log in with the other provider. So this makes sure that if they are logging in here to this endpoint, they have to log in through that provider. So that means they have to authenticate again with their provider. So that's about it. So in the URLs, we added the Google URL, and then you see we set our view, and then in our main application routing, that will be in the urls.py, then we added our social URLs. So this makes sure that when we add it here, it's going to be accessible by anyone else in the world, and then we make it available to also our Swagger documentation. Okay, so that's well and good. That's cool. So now we can go ahead and start talking about Facebook authentication, which should be quite easy to go about. So to start with, the first thing, of course, we need the view. So if we come here, you will be able to see that we have in our views.py, we have the Facebook social auth view. So it's the same thing, it accepts the token. So we notice that it uses the Facebook social auth serializer. So if we go to that serializer and go to Facebook, you see that it's quite basic. So the only thing we do there is validate the auth token. So when it comes to Facebook, we need to install the Facebook SDK for Python. So this is the one. So you want to make sure you install it. And then when you install it, you're going to be able to validate tokens, and that's that. All right, so for Facebook, we use the Facebook, and then we call Facebook validate, and then give it the auth token, and then it can give us the user or not. So what happens is it might not give us the user. That means that, so if the token is not valid, it will not give us the user, and it's going to throw an exception. So when it throws an exception, then we send it back to our application, so our application can handle it. If we are able to get the user information, you will see that. So you see that we construct our user data, and then we call register social user. So we've already looked at register social user. So if we come back to register social user, which is here, you will notice that it does everything that we talked about, checks the image that exists. If it does, then logs in the user. If it doesn't, then creates a user's account. And then I want to show you what happens when we try to, and then I want to show you how we create the usernames. So notice that when we are registering, we have this function that creates the user's name. So we have this one, get username. So the way it works is Facebook will send us something like Christ Trudy in the name, and Google will send us something like Smith, something like this. So what we do is we remove the spaces, turn everything into lowercase because everything else is lowercase on our application, and then we check if we already have the user with that username. So if we don't have the user, then we use that username. So if we have the user, then we will generate a random username using rand int, and then we concatenate the username, and then we call the same function to generate another username for this user. So this is a recursive function. So when it gets the username that doesn't exist, then it will return that. And so once we get that, we'll go ahead and register the user. And yeah, so that's it. So in the URLs, we added 2 there. I know you're probably asking yourself how this validate works. So if we click on this, the way this validate works is it uses the Graph API. So it does Facebook.graph API, and then it sends the access token to the Graph API. So the Graph API will return for us the profile of the user, and once we get that is when we go ahead to register this user. So this gives us the user information, and then we try to authenticate this user by creating an account or logging them in if they had logged in before. Okay, so that's it. That's it for Facebook. The way you get so what you need from Facebook is you need to go to what you need from Facebook to be able to do that is you need to go to Facebook developers. So if you don't have an app, you're going to need to create an app. You can create any app, so you can call it anything. So I can have app there, app purpose for my business, doesn't really matter. Then I'm gonna click OK. And then they're going to ask you to to prove that you're not a bot. Okay, I'm not a robot. So once you prove that you're not a robot, you can continue. And then when you go to this, and then the only thing you need is the app ID. So once you get the app ID, then you can use the app ID for the client's login. for example, you will see here, I have this JavaScript example. You see that the only thing I sent to Facebook is the app ID. So yeah, so that's gonna be it for Facebook. All right, so how about Twitter? So for Twitter, the process is actually quite different. So what you need to do is you want to go to developer.twitter.com and then you want to apply to be a Twitter developer. So they will ask you a couple of questions about what you want to do with the API. And then once everything is good, they will send you an email telling you that you have been accepted and you can now create applications. So once you have been accepted, then you can come and create projects, which you can do from here. So once you create the projects, you can add apps. That's very straightforward here. I'm not going to be expanding it, but I know you guys can do it. So once you have that, you can create an app. So an app, you give it a name, they give you the app ID, and then you need to edit. You need to allow this authentication. So here you can edit this. So when I toggle that, you will need to provide a callback URL. So this is where the user gets redirected when they authenticate. Then you can have this other information, but they are quite optional. And then what's very important is these keys and tokens. So when I click on keys and tokens, then you will see that I have this information. So I can click view, and then I have this API key, and then the API secret. Okay, so once you have these, then you can take them to your backend. So you will see that here in my .env, I have this Twitter key and then the Twitter consumer secret, but you guys can use your own. I'm going to be deleting this right after here. So once you get these, now we need to set up a view. So the way we set up a view is we need to set up a view which is very simple. Basically what it does, it accepts the user to send the tokens to the server, and then when this view picks them, it sends them to the serializer. So if we can go to our serializer, you will see, if we can go to our Twitter serializer, you see that we expect these two. That will be the access token key and then the access token secret. So these are generated by Twitter for the client, and then the client can send them back to our server. These are not actually the information we got in Twitter. These are generated by the client. Okay. So once these ones get here, you will notice that in our view, we call is valid. So when you call is valid, this validate will get called, and when it gets called, this code will be run. So what we do in this code is we pick out what the user is sending us, or what we are sending from the clients to this API, the access token key, and then the access token secret. So once we get those, we use a module called Python Twitter actually. So let me actually bring it up here so you guys can know it. So it's called Python Twitter. So we use a module called Python Twitter. So this is what you want to use. So you can do pip install Python Twitter. So once you have that, now you can be able to use the Python Twitter module to talk to the Twitter APIs. So you see that I have my Twitter helper here. If I can go to the Twitter helper, you will see that, let me bring this one out. You see that we have this function that validates the OAuth tokens. So you see it takes in the token sent by the client, and then what we do is we also get our consumer key and then the consumer secret key. So don't confuse this. So this is the API key actually. Then this is the information we have actually here. So this is the consumer key. You will see them being named differently, but basically that's what they mean. And then this is the consumer secret, which is the API key secret. They just change API key for consumer. So don't get confused by those. So once we have those, now we can call twitter.api, and then we give it our information. So then we pass in our consumer key, our consumer secret. So this is what we know on our server, and then what the user sent from the client. So once we set up this, then we can use this and call verify credentials. So when we call verify credentials, we can pass in more options like include email. So if we want the email, you can include that. And then once this returns, then we can return the profile information that is sent when the user authenticates properly from our application. So once our application authenticates on behalf of the user, so once we have that, then we return them. So that means we can use this information anywhere else we want in our application. So if there is an issue and we can't connect to the Twitter API, so this try fails, we tell them that the tokens are not working properly. All right, so coming back to the serializer in the validate, you see that the other validate also tokens will return for us the user information if that works correctly. So when we get the user information, then we call register user as normal. So you guys already know how register user works. Basically, it will check if the user has an email. So if this email has an account, if it does, it will log them in. If it doesn't, it will create their username using this. It will create their username using this generate username, and then it will basically verify them and then authenticate them and give them a token. Otherwise, it's gonna go ahead and log them in either way. Okay, so that's it. You will see that in the URLs we add Twitter, say that it's accessible to our main application URLs and also to our Swagger UI. So when it comes to Twitter, I have a basic React application that is using the package called React Twitter Login. So what it does is we give it the consumer secret and then the consumer key and then the callback URL. So I have the things defined in my environment variables, but if you don't care about React, that doesn't really matter. So what matters is we need to supply. So what matters is we need to provide that information when we are making API calls to the Twitter API. Okay, so we have the auth handler. So we have the auth handler function that will be normally responsible to send the tokens to the server or tell the user that something went wrong. So I guess that's gonna be it. That's it for now. So what I'm gonna be doing from here is I'm gonna push this code to GitHub and then you guys can check it out if you need to. If this video was helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, if there's anything you would want to know more, please leave the question in the comment section below. I will be happy to jump in and have a chat with you guys. So thanks guys for watching. I'll talk to you soon.